On the staff of Admiral Chester Nimitz, Pacific Commander, a team of code breakers has untangled a mass of enemy radio messages. They contain grim news. Early in June, hardly a month after the Battle of the Coral Sea, and 5,000 miles to the north, Admiral Yamamoto plans a massive attack on Midway Island, a strategic American outpost. His objectives are to secure an advanced base for new all-out attacks on Pearl Harbor and to lure the remnants of our Pacific Fleet to annihilation. The odds are overwhelming. Admiral Nimitz has no battleships against Yamamoto's 9. Only 8 cruisers against 15. Facing 4 Japanese carriers, the Hornet, Enterprise, and hastily repaired Yorktown. But we have the advantage of knowing Yamamoto's plan. Reinforcements are flown into the Midway-based squadrons. The battle commanders, Rear Admirals Frank Jack Fletcher and Raymond Spruance, placed their 3 carriers in wait north of Midway. Wade McCluskey, then commander of the Enterprise Air Group, now a retired Rear Admiral, remembers how it started for him.
I was called into Admiral Spruance's cabin, and he told me then it could be a turning point because we had very few ships left. So if this was going to be a major battle and we were defeated, well, that meant the end of the war practically. Then it was 8 o'clock before we actually got a report of the Japanese striking force, which included their carriers. And then it became our time to take off.
Fiercely, unflinching, knowing the stakes, 8 waves of our airmen go after the Japanese fleet. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters. The American carrier pilots, with the odds stacked high against them, will score an incredible victory.
About 5 after 12, using binoculars, and I was still at 19,000 feet, I discovered straight ahead about 30 miles the Japanese striking force.
Unaware of the nearby American carriers, the Japanese are caught at a great disadvantage. In the sights of our dive bombers as they scream out of the sky, are Japanese flight decks packed with airplanes and high-explosive bombs. The Japanese pay a heavy price. When the Holocaust ends, their 4 carriers with their planes and a cruiser are at the bottom.
What makes Midway so distinctive, in contrast to the Coral Sea, is that it was a decisive battle. Clearly, this was the end of, the beginning of the end of Japanese naval power in the Pacific.
But we also pay a price. Our carrier Yorktown is lost, and more than 100 airplanes put out of action.
We had terrible disasters, and I think particularly with our torpedo planes. These were really old-fashioned types of aircraft to engage in a modern battle. And the torpedo squadrons, which took off from the 3 carriers we had available, got slaughtered. One was wiped out completely. This was Torpedo Squadron 8 under the command of John Waldron. There was 1 survivor. His plane crashed, but he was fished out of the sea a little later.
The 1 survivor of Torpedo 8 at Midway is George Gay, today an airline pilot.
Most of us were brand new ensigns right out of training. When we got to Midway and were to make our takeoff, it was the first time we'd ever carried a torpedo, pickle as we called them. We just went into the fleet, tried to get around the destroyers and then the cruisers and things to take whatever came first as a target. They had about 75 airplanes down there trying to eat us up, and we only had 15, so we didn't last very long. I was tail end Charlie, last aircraft in the whole formation, and I was kind of sitting back here watching this whole thing. I made my attack on this carrier, and I somehow got in close enough to drop my torpedo and get through. I couldn't use this hand. I had a bullet in here and one in this arm. The Zeros jumped on me again out on the other side and shot me down. So when I came back to the surface, bumped into my life raft. Also, this black cushion I didn't want them to pick me up. So I put this cushion over my head, and I would turn this sideways to any ship or anything that was close, and I could watch them out of the corner. I'd see through this thing. They were looking at me with binoculars, but they'd see this thing and assume that it was a box or a piece of debris or something rather than my head bobbing up out there, and they passed me up. I was able to stay there all day, even though they were picking people up all over the place. I'm sitting right in the front row here of this big battle. I saw our dive bombers come in and knew all those boys too, and I knew that this was their first dive, not only with a bomb aboard, but in that airplane. So I was just cheering like a football game. The PBY came by, landed on the water, and picked me up in this PBY. Took me into Midway. I lost about 24 pounds during that time. When I got down to Pearl Harbor and the Admiral came in, Admiral Nimitz, he said he wanted to know about it. A fisheye view and a front row seat to the biggest naval battle in history. Well, I'm kind of proud of that. I don't want to go through it again just to lose 24 pounds, but it was something to remember.